in death, Cadia stands. Carry its light into the dark. Before the fall, there was Cadia, a world of stone and fire, a world that never slept. In the cold void of the Segmentum Obscurus, where the stars themselves flicker as if in fear of what lies beyond, there stood a world that had never known peace. Cadia, the fortress world, a planet forged not by the hand of nature, but by the will of war itself. Its skies were heavy with the trails of gunships, and its horizon lined with fortress spires and bastions of adamantine. From orbit, Cadia gleamed like a scar of steel upon the dark canvas of the galaxy, a wound that refused to close. Every mountain was a gun emplacement, every valley a trench line, every city a fortress built upon the bones of the one before it. To most of the Imperium, Cadia was not merely a world, it was a promise. A promise that the horrors of the warp would never spill unchecked into the realms of man. For 10,000 years, it had kept that promise. For 10,000 years, it had stood between the Eye of Terror and the fragile light of the Emperor's realm. And for 10,000 years, its people had never truly slept. The children of Cadia were not born in cradles, but in barracks. They learned to march before they learned to walk. They learned to shoot before they learned to speak. To be Cadian was not to live, it was to serve. Each heartbeat on Cadia echoed with discipline. In the cold dawn, the sound of drill sergeants rang across the parade grounds, the rhythm of marching boots resounding like a great metallic heartbeat. The people of Cadia were the shield of humanity, the unyielding bulwark that had held since the dawn of the Imperium's long night. But even a world of soldiers has moments of quiet. There were times, brief, fragile, when the winds would calm over the plains of Kasser Myrak, and the sky would shimmer with the faint aurora of the warp storms beyond the system. From the watchtowers, sentinels would gaze into that strange, swirling light on the horizon, the Eye of Terror, and wonder how long their world could hold against the darkness. None of them would speak of it, but all of them knew that darkness was coming closer. Cadia's surface was a patchwork of frozen tundras, blackened ruins, and fortresses that pierced the clouds. The planet's rotation gave it long, drawn-out nights, the kind of night that could swallow a man's thoughts whole. And yet, amidst the cold and the silence, there burned the ceaseless light of discipline. From orbit, one could see the great lines of the defense grid, the glowing veins of last fire emplacements, the shield domes shimmering against the void. These were the arteries of the Imperium's heart, the mechanisms of survival, ticking endlessly against the encroaching night. To the untrained eye, it might seem lifeless, but to those who knew, Cadia was alive, alive with the will of billions who refused to falter. Each fortress city, or Kaz, was both home and citadel. The people within lived their entire lives within its walls, generations trained to man the guns, repair the armor, and stand ready for the next incursion. Their banners were faded, their hymns familiar, their faith unbroken. The priests of the ecclesiarchy would walk the corridors, their voices hoarse from endless prayer. For the Emperor watches, even here. For Cadia stands in his light. The soldiers would answer not with words, but with a salute. A silent vow that no demonic storm, no heretic fleet, would ever breach their line. And yet, even as the prayers echoed through the stone halls, the wind outside whispered of something older, something patient, The Eye of Terror loomed eternal on the horizon, its scarlet glow staining the skies of Cadia with the blood of stars. Every Cadian knew its light. Every Cadian grew up beneath its gaze. To live on Cadia was to live beneath the shadow of that wound in reality. To look upon hell every day and refuse to bow. Some said it drove men mad. Others said it made them strong. Perhaps both were true. There was beauty in Cadia, though few would call it so. Not the beauty of flowers or of peace, but of defiance. The beauty of a world that refused to yield. At dusk, the sky turned a pale violet, and the aurora of the warp shimmered across the horizon like 1,000 dying embers. The towers of the Cassar cast long shadows over the tundra, and the sound of distant artillery rolled like thunder beyond the mountains. In that moment, between day and night, Cadia seemed eternal, like a statue carved from the bones of gods. In the barracks, young recruits cleaned their weapons by candlelight. They did not laugh. They did not dream. They recited oaths, their voices low and rhythmic. Cadia stands. Cadia endures. Cadia falls for no man, no daemon, no god, but the Emperor. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the trenches and gun emplacements in white silence. The world was quiet now, but every silence on Cadia was only the breath before another storm. In the halls of command, ancient maps flickered with tactical runes. Marks of past invasions, each repelled by the blood of millions. Commanders traced their fingers along those scars, remembering the countless battles fought in the name of duty. There were stories whispered among the officers, tales of ancestors who had stood at the very edge of the eye and fired their last round before being consumed by the warp. They were not forgotten. No one was ever forgotten on Cadia. Every death was a stone in the wall that still stood. The fortress world had seen ages rise and fall. It had watched the Imperium fracture and mend, watched crusades burn across the stars and fade into myth. And through it all, Cadia remained, the sentinel that never slept. But deep beneath its surface, in the cold heart of its catacombs, the old records spoke of a prophecy. When the stars bleed and the sky is torn, the last bastion shall fall, and from its ashes mankind shall be tested anew. Most dismissed it as superstition, but sometimes, when the auroras flared crimson and the ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, even the most steadfast of soldiers could not help but wonder, how long could Cadia truly stand? And yet the people endured, because to live without Cadia was unthinkable. It was more than a home. It was a purpose. They were the first line, the unbroken wall, the watchful eye, that guarded mankind from oblivion. They could not imagine a galaxy where Cadia had fallen. Because if Cadia fell, the light of the Imperium itself might flicker and die. And so as night descended across the fortress spires, the watch beacons ignited one by one, a chain of golden fire across the dark plains. Each flame a vow, each light a whisper against the void. We stand still, we guard still, we fight still, for Cadia, for mankind, the Eye of Terror, a wound upon the stars, bleeding madness into reality. And before it stood Cadia. Long before the Imperium had a name, before the Emperor's armies had marched upon Terra, before mankind had even known the stars, there was the warp, an ocean of thoughts and nightmares, a mirror of the soul of all living things. It was from that sea of madness that the Eye of Terror was born, a storm in eternity. After the ancient Eldar fell, their gods screamed and their souls tore the fabric of reality apart. That tear still bleeds to this day, a hole where the immaterial and the material intertwine, where daemons walk as men, and men are devoured by their own dreams. That place became known to humanity as the Eye of Terror. No light escapes it. No ship that drifts too close ever returns whole. It is a realm where time folds upon itself, where the laughter of gods echoes in the screams of the lost. And there, on the edge of that abyss, stood Cadia, a single world between sanity and ruin. No one could say why the Emperor chose Cadia to be the gatekeeper. Some claim it was by divine will, others that it was built upon the bones of ancient fortresses left by those who came before. But all who looked upon it understood one truth: Cadia was the wall. If the Eye was hell, Cadia was its gate, and for 10,000 years that gate had never opened. The people of Cadia lived beneath the constant light of the Eye. It hung on their horizon like a second sun, not of warmth, but of blood-red fire. Even at night, its glow seeped through the clouds, painting the snows in crimson. Every Cadian child grew up beneath that light, knowing that the storm beyond was alive, and that one day it would reach for them. To live under such a sky was to be shaped by it. They were not a people of fear, but of purpose. Their lives were not their own. They belonged to the wall. Every breath, every bullet, every prayer was offered to the same vow. Cadia stands. The Eye shall not pass. It was more than a phrase. It was a creed. It was written in the stone of their fortresses, carved into the armor plates of their tanks, whispered by dying lips in the mud and blood of battlefields. It was what made them human in the face of the inhuman. There are few who can look upon the Eye of Terror and remain sane. From orbit, it appears as a vast whirlpool of light and shadow, endless storms of color that shift and twist in ways the mind cannot follow. At its heart lies the Imperium, the home of gods that were never meant to exist. Slanesh, the Lord of Excess; Khorne, the Blood God; Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways; and Nurgle, the Father of Decay. Their laughter echoes across the void. Their whispers seep into dreams. Their followers, the traitor legions, the lost and the damned, have spent millennia clawing at the gates of reality, yearning to spill once more into the galaxy of men. And it is Cadia they see first. It is Cadia they must break. The fortresses that ring the planet's surface are not mere defenses. They are ritual, sacred geometry against the chaos beyond. Each bastion, each trench, each gun emplacement forms part of a grand pattern older than any living memory, a web of faith and steel meant to hold the Eye at bay. The Magi of the Mechanicus call it the anchor pattern, a lattice of psychic resonance that keeps the warp from tearing the world apart. The priests call it a miracle. The soldiers simply call it home. Even when the air hums with unseen energy and the shadows twitch at the corner of their vision, they continue there. Duties, steadfast, unblinking, eternal. For to falter, even for a moment, is to invite the storm in. There is a story told among the oldest regiments, a legend whispered in the quiet hours before dawn. It is said that every time a Cadian dies defending the wall, a light flickers to life in the void, a tiny spark holding back the darkness. And when the eye swells and surges, those lights burn brighter, the souls of the fallen forming a shield across the stars. It is only a story, and yet the veterans say that sometimes, in the deepest nights, when the eye blazes brightest, you can see the glimmers of those souls, a constellation that seems to take the shape of a great shield, forever guarding their world. End of paragraph. But even the strongest wall feels the weight of eternity. Waves of chaos have broken against Cadia's defenses. The Black Crusades of Abaddon the Despoiler. 12 great invasions have come and failed, each leaving scars upon the land and the people. Each time, the Imperium sent more men, more tanks, more prayers, and each time, Cadia stood. At the 13th, they said it would end, for nothing stands forever. But in those days, before the fall, such words were heresy. For on Cadia, there was no end. There was only the next battle. The eye pulsed again that night, a tremor through the stars. The astronomers of Cadia felt it before they saw it, the faint hum in the void, the ripple of unreality brushing against the edge of existence. Then came the light, crimson and violet, spiraling outward like the heartbeat of a god. The old ones said it was a bad omen. The priests said it was a test. The soldiers said nothing. They simply checked their weapons and stood a little straighter at their posts. For on Cadia, omens meant nothing. Only duty did. Deep within Casser Craft, the oldest fortress city, the Vox Towers whispered with static. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests adjusted their augurs, their mechanical voices chanting binary hymns. Somewhere far above the clouds, the orbital platforms shifted their aim, realigning the planetary defense grid toward the source of the disturbance. The Eye of Terror was growing restless, and in the command sanctum, illuminated by the cold glow of tactical holomaps, the senior officers watched in silence. They had seen this before: the surges, the storms, the brief awakenings. But something in this pulse was different. It lingered longer. It watched back. In the stillness of that moment, beneath the iron sky, one could almost imagine the sound of a heartbeat, not of man, but of something vast and cruel. The eye was alive, and it hungered. Outside, the soldiers of Cadia continued their patrols. They moved with the precision of machines, each step measured, each gaze unwavering. They did not look toward the eye. They had been taught never to stare for too long. The human mind was not made to comprehend infinity. But even without looking, they could feel it. The weight, the pressure, the endless whisper of the warp pressing against the veil. And still, they stood. That was the paradox of Cadia. It was both doomed and eternal. Every Cadian knew, somewhere deep inside, that their worlds could not last forever. But they also knew that until it fell, the galaxy would endure. And so, they lived their lives not in fear of death, but in defiance of it. If the eye must burn, they said, then let it burn upon our shields. As dawn broke, the horizon bled crimson once more. The eye shimmered, a wound upon the heavens, casting its sickly light across the endless fortifications. The Vox Towers hummed with quiet energy. The banners of the Imperium flapped in the wind, and somewhere, far below the frozen soil, the engines of war stirred from their slumber. Cadia stood, as it always had, the gate, the wall, the light that never faltered. But in the void beyond, chaos stirred, and the eye of terror, they were born beneath the shadow of the eye. They were forged in discipline and baptized in war. They were the sons and daughters of Cadia, the people of iron faith. On Cadia, life was not lived, it was served. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment belonged not to oneself, but to duty. There were no farmers here, no merchants, no wanderers. There were only soldiers, builders of walls, keepers of guns, and watchers of the void. Children were raised not with stories of adventure, but of vigilance. Their lullabies were the sounds of marching boots, the distant thunder of artillery tests, and the hum of shield generators echoing through the night. When a child could stand, they learned to salute. When they could speak, they learned the name of the emperor. When they could hold a rifle, they learned that the safety of mankind rested upon their hands. It was not cruelty, it was survival. And to a Cadian, there was no higher honor. In the barracks of Kasser Myrak, under the cold glow of lumen strips, rows of young cadets trained through the night. Their movements were precise, mechanical, flawless, not out of fear, but because precision was worship. Each breath they took was part of the ritual of endurance. An instructor's voice echoed through the hall, sharp as the crack of last fire. Again, tighter stance. Remember who you are. You are Cadia. They would not be praised for their strength, nor pitied for their exhaustion. They would simply be told to stand again. Because that was what Cadia did. It stood. The older generations bore the marks of a lifetime of vigilance. Their skin was weathered by wind and war, their eyes sharp and cold. Yet beneath that steel exterior burned something quiet and profound, a faith unshaken by time or terror. Every household kept a small shrine to the emperor, though none had seen his light. They knelt before it, not for comfort, but for conviction. Each prayer was whispered like a report, precise, unwavering. For the emperor protects, for Cadia stands, for duty we endure. Endure. There were no grand cathedrals here, no gilded statues or choirs of angels. Faith on Cadia was simple, forged in necessity, tempered by loss, because it asked for nothing but strength. Sometimes in the rare hours between shifts, the soldiers would gather in silence along the parapets of their cas, looking out across the frozen plains. Bray, the auroras shimmered faintly on the horizon, the light of the Eye of Terror dancing across the clouds. They did not fear it. It was part of their sky, part of their world, part of their identity. A young trooper once asked his sergeant, "Do you think we'll ever see peace?" The sergeant, a man whose eyes had seen 100 battles, only smiled. Block quote. "Peace is not for us, boy. Peace is what we guard, so others can dream of it." The boy nodded. He did not ask again. To be Cadian was to inherit a legacy carved from sacrifice. Fathers trained their sons in the art of battle. Mothers taught their daughters to pray with steady hands and steady aim. There was no separation of family and duty. They were one and the same. At birth, every child was given two things, a name and a regiment number. By the time they reached adulthood, they could disassemble and reassemble a lasgun blindfolded. By 20, most had already served their first campaign. By 30, if they still breathed, they were veterans, respected, scarred, and often missing something they could not name. And yet they smiled. A small, rare smile, not of joy, but of belonging. Among them walked the priests of the ecclesiarchy, robed in ash gray, carrying relics not of gold, but of iron, fragments of helmets, spent shells, rusted dog tags of those who had fallen before. They did not preach of paradise or redemption. They spoke of endurance, of courage, of sacrifice. There is no paradise but duty fulfilled. There is no salvation but the Emperor's will. And there is no death in service, only continuation. The soldiers listened in silence, not because they were devout, but because the words rang true. They had seen too much to believe in comfort, but they believed, fiercely, in purpose. On holy days, the banners of each Kassar were unfurled. The people gathered, not in celebration, but in remembrance. They read the names of the fallen, thousands upon thousands, carved into the cold walls of the memorials. Each name was a whisper in the wind, each letter a promise. Children touched the names of ancestors they would never meet. Old veterans stood beside them, eyes closed, lips moving in quiet prayer. The refrain was always the same: Cadia stands. Cadia stands. Cadia stands. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, perhaps even the gods themselves heard it and paused. To outsiders, Cadia might have seemed lifeless. A world of endless drills, endless battles, endless sacrifice. But for those who lived it, it was a world of meaning. Every act, every breath, every loss was part of something greater than self. They found beauty not in peace, but in endurance. Hope not in victory, but in the act of standing against the storm. For in defiance they found faith. That was what it meant to be Cadian. Not to win, but to stand no matter the cost. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind howled through the metal corridors and the eye of terror glowed faintly on the horizon, one could sometimes hear it, a low hum, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. It was said to be the soul of Cadia itself, the pulse of billions united in purpose. A world that would not sleep, a people who would not yield. Even if the sky falls, the old saying went, we shall stand upon the ashes and hold the line. In the deep catacombs beneath Kassar Kraf, where the air was thick with dust and history, ancient banners hung from the walls, faded by time, heavy with memory. The oldest among them bore the sigil of the first regiments, men and women who had faced the first Black Crusade and lived to tell of it. Each banner was a relic, each stain a story, each thread a testament to the will of humanity. And though the cloth was frayed, it still stood tall, for that was the way of Cadia. Even when torn, it stood. There is a saying among the Astra Militarum, whispered with reverence and awe. To be Cadian is to stand against the impossible and not notice. It is not arrogance. It is not pride. It is simply truth. For when others would falter, the Cadians endure. When others would flee, they hold. When others would despair, they whisper through blood and fire. Cadia stands. And as the 13th Black Crusade gathered beyond the veil, the people of Cadia went about their duties as they always had. They trained, they prayed, they repaired the guns, they stood the watch as their fathers and mothers had before them. For to them, tomorrow was irrelevant. Only the line mattered. Only Cadia mattered. Crest Commander, the wind howled across the plains that night. The auroras flared, and the light of the eye shimmered faintly in the snow. Within the cars, the people slept, but with the calm of those who had already made peace with their purpose. They would awaken with the dawn. They would march. They would fight. They would die. But until the last man fell, Cadia would stand. The people went back to their homes. They were at peace for another legion. They were already at peace. They would die. But until the last man fell, Cadia would stand. Parentheses, they would face it, as they always had, with steady hands. Surface of Cadia, silent heart. Each city fortress, castle, is a living organism, operating with the cold precision of an ancient war machine. The walls are dozens of meters thick, carved with sacred symbols and prayers. Every brick, every steel joint, carries the oath of thousands of generations of Cadians, that if the end comes, they will die where they stand. When night falls, the lights of thousands of beacons and defense towers light up the sky like artificial stars. From afar, Titan cannons can be seen sitting silently on the mountainside, their muzzles pointed into the air, waiting for the order to fire. Inside the castle, the footsteps of soldiers echo through the steel corridors. No one speaks much, because in Cadia, silence is a symbol of discipline. Only the sound of wind and the echo of machinery, the sounds of people accustomed to living on the edge of destruction. In the heart of Kazarholn, a group of Cadian children were studying under Drill Master Varen. There were no lullabies, no fairy tales, just campaign maps, trench models, and oaths of allegiance to the Imperium. I was born of Cadia, I live for Cadia, and I will die for Cadia. The words echoed evenly, dryly, as if it were a natural part of breathing. One of the children looked out the window, where distant columns of smoke rose from the power reactors. The orange light reflected off his young face. He asked softly, "Drillmaster, will there ever be a day when we don't have to fight?" Varen was silent for a long moment, then pointed to the horizon, where the eye of terror loomed, a crimson rift in reality. "When that storm is gone, when the gods of chaos are dead, then perhaps, my son." No one said anything more. But in the cold room, the answer echoed, like a promise every Cadian knew would never come true. Cadians were not just born to fight, they were made to guard the gates. For 10,000 years, Cadia has been the bulwark between the Imperium and the Warp. Generation after generation has passed down the same creed. Cadia stands, not just a slogan, but a collective soul. In the great iron cathedrals, chaplains chanted prayers for thousands of soldiers before they set out. Their voices echoed in the hollow space. The Emperor defends humanity. Cadia is the sword and shield. Never retreat, never fear, never forget. Outside, snow fell silently on the basilisk cannons. Soldiers wiped their barrels with their bare hands, their breath turning to mist. They did not speak of tomorrow. No one needed to be reminded that death could come at any moment, for every Cadian knew that they were born in war and would end in war. In the deepest part of the infrastructure, Mechanicus engineers were busy repairing the warp detectors. A soft hiss sounded. The warp field detector oscillated. They glanced at each other. The storm was growing. But above ground, the soldiers were still patrolling. Footsteps pounded the snow. Spotlights swept through the darkness. No one panicked. No one ran. Because this was Cadia. As the day began, the pale yellow light of the Cadian sun filtered through the thick cloud cover. A cold wind blew through the defense towers, carrying the scent of ozone and burnt steel. On the Cascraft lookout, Captain Loran looked through his plasmascope, scanning the space above. The Imperial fleet remained silent, hovering in orbit like giant steel ghosts. A few wart signals flickered briefly, but were quickly gone. "It's so quiet," he muttered. Behind him, Lieutenant Wren replied softly, "Before a storm, the wind always stops." The two of them fell silent. They had heard the rumors that Abaddon the Despoiler had gathered Chaos fleets, that heretical sects were rising on the fringes. But Cadia had heard them 1,000 times, and each time, Cadia stood firm. Down below, in the barracks, the morning prayers rang out. Thousands of soldiers knelt, their hands clenched on their weapons, reciting the oath. "We are the walls, we do not break. Cadia stands." The sound mingled with the wind, spreading through the fortress like a stream of life energy. Cadia, a cold light in the endless night, was still shining. As dusk fell, the lights of Cadia slowly came on. In the distance, the Eye of Terror glowed like a bleeding wound, reflecting a terrifying red light onto the planet's surface. Yet, amid the scene, there was a strange beauty, as if the universe were holding its breath. A voice slowly spoke. "It is said that if Cadia falls, the Imperium will tremble. But some also believe that only when Cadia falls will humanity understand the price of hope." On the frozen plains, the last soldiers of the Night Watch stood guard, their eyes fixed on the warp rift, which was glowing ever brighter. No one knew that in that moment, history was about to turn its final page on Cadia. And in that cold silence, only one sentence remained, etched into the minds of every soldier. Cadia stands. In the cold void beyond the Eye of Terror, something ancient stirred. For millennia, the Eye had burned, a wound in the fabric of real space, bleeding madness into existence. But now, it pulsed with new life, as if the gods themselves were inhaling. The warp screamed. Across the segmentum obscurus, psychers woke from fevered dreams. Their eyes rolled white, their mouths uttering prophecies not their own. Ships went silent. Astropathic choirs collapsed mid-message, their throats torn by invisible claws. Everywhere, one whisper echoed, "He comes." Deep within the Eye, where time and flesh held no meaning, the War Master of Chaos prepared his return. Abaddon the Despoiler, Lord of the Black Legion, the chosen of the Dark Gods, stood upon the bridge of his flagship Vengeful Spirit. Before him floated a holographic projection, the map of the Imperium, a million worlds glimmering like dust motes in darkness. And at its heart, the fortress world of Cadia. Abaddon's golden eyes burned brighter than the warp fires around him. 10 times I have struck at the Imperium," he whispered, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder beneath the sea. 10 times they have rebuilt what I have shattered. But now, there shall be no rebuilding. He raised the ancient weapon he carried, Drachnian, the demon sword, forged from the essence of a never-born god. The blade whispered, its voice like 1,000 dying stars. The War Master smiled. The 13th Crusade begins, and with that command, the wart erupted. From the Eye poured forth the legions of damnation, ships made of bone and hatred, their hulls carved with screaming faces. Planet-killer weapons ignited. Warp storms blossomed like dark flowers, cutting the Imperium apart. The stars dimmed as the Black Crusade began. News of the invasion reached Cadia, not through words, but through the silence that followed. Entire outposts vanished from Vox networks. Patrol fleets never returned. Astropaths bled from their eyes, as messages tore through their minds like razors. In the command bastion of Kasser Kraf, Lord Castellan Creed stood before a hololith, showing the Cadian Gate, the narrow corridor of real space between the Eye of Terror and the Imperium. Now, that corridor burned red with enemy signatures. Beside him, Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax adjusted her rosette and studied the display. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the truth. It has begun. Creed nodded slowly. His expression did not change, but deep inside, he knew. This was no raid, no mere chaos incursion. This was the storm that every Cadian had been born for. Signal every Kasser. Full mobilization. All regiments to defensive posture Delta. Bring the void shields online. And the civilians, my lord? A young officer asked. Creed's reply was cold as the steel beneath his boots. There are no civilians on Cadia. The orders spread like fire. Within hours, every fortress city was alive. Barracks thundered with marching feet. Airfields roared as Valkyries took flight. Titans awoke from slumber, their reactor hearts pulsing like the beat of gods. The Cadian 8th Regiment, Creed's personal command, assembled in perfect formation. Their faces were calm. Their voices, when they spoke, were steady. For the Emperor, for Cadia. In orbit, the Imperial Navy formed its battle line. The sky above Cadia shimmered with energy. The shimmering aurora of void shields, meeting the first touch of warp storms. The silence of the past 1,000 years was over. The galaxy had begun to burn. From the Eye of Terror came the fleet of Abaddon, vast beyond counting. The Black Legion led the charge, ships wreathed in balefire, crewed by traitors whose souls had long since been sold. Behind them came the word-bearers, chanting hymns of blasphemy. The Iron Warriors followed, their vessels bristling with siege engines and orbital bombardment cannons. Then came the Dark Mechanicum, their ships pulsing with unholy light, machines bound with demons, weapons that screamed as they fired. And behind them, the tide, the endless, unnumbered tide of madness. Cultist fleets, corrupted imperial ships, demonic entities that swam through the void like predators in a black ocean. The eye itself seemed to expand, its light casting a red wound across the night sky of Cadia. Children in the lower Kassers looked up and wept, thinking the heavens themselves were bleeding. In the upper bastions, Creed received the first reports. Multiple warp signatures emerging near the gate. Estimated enemy strength, overwhelming. Overwhelming, he repeated quietly, as though testing the word. Then we'll test how strong overwhelming really is. He turned to his aides. Prepare the phalanx defense pattern. Inform Lord Admiral Jaren to hold the line. Cadia does not yield. Every order he gave was repeated by thousands of voices, carried through Vox networks, through signal relays, through the hearts of soldiers who did not know fear. Even as the sky tore open above them, even as the first chaos drop pods streaked down like falling meteors, Cadia stood, for now. When the first ships of Abaddon's fleet entered real space, the heavens themselves screamed. Reality split apart like glass struck by a hammer. Warp lightning lashed across the void, tearing through Imperial ships before their shields could stabilize. From orbit, the Chaos Fleet unleashed its wrath. Bombardments that turned cities to molten rivers, energy beams that burned trenches kilometers deep. Entire battalions vanished beneath walls of fire. But Cadia did not break. The fortress world answered. Ground-based macro cannons roared to life. Lance batteries fired upward in blinding arcs, piercing the void with blue fire. One by one, Chaos cruisers exploded, vast blossoms of fire in the dark. The sky became a tapestry of death. In Kasserholm, the 122nd Cadian Regiment held the outer line. Sergeant Malloran barked orders, voice hoarse but steady. Hold your fire. Wait for them to breach atmosphere. Moments later, the horizon turned crimson. Dozens of drop pods slammed into the ground, each opening like an iron flower, spilling forth warriors in black and gold armor. The Black Legion. Their bolters roared, their laughter echoing over the comms as they advanced through smoke and blood. The Cadians met them with volleys of lasgun fire, the air filled with streaks of red light and screams. Above them, in the distance, Titans of the Legio Invigilata strode forward, their footsteps shaking the earth. Each shot from their cannons turned chaos armor to molten slag. Still, for every traitor slain, 2 more emerged. The battlefield became a storm. Steel, fire, and devotion, clashing in an inferno that consumed all reason. As the hours passed, the war turned into a test of endurance. Every trench, every wall, every bunker became a tomb waiting to be filled. Greyfax stood atop a ruined bastion, her eyes scanning the horizon through the scope of her bolt rifle. Her voice crackled through the vox. They are probing our defenses, searching for weakness. Creed's voice replied, calm and certain. Then we'll show them none. Below her, the Sisters of Battle of the Order of the Ebon Chalice formed a shining wall of faith. Their hymns rose above the sound of gunfire, each word a weapon against despair. The Emperor is our shield, his wrath is our flame. Parentheses. When demons broke through the warp's thin veil, their forms shifting and shrieking, the sisters met them head-on, flamer fire silencing their howls. Everywhere, Cadia fought not just with steel, but with belief, because belief was all they had left. Days bled into nights, and nights into eternity. The sky never cleared, only fire and ash remained. The dead were piled in silence, their bodies marked with purity seals, their names spoken in whispers. Creed stood once more in the command chamber, his cloak torn, his face shadowed by exhaustion. The reports came in one after another. Kasserholm lost, Kasser Tirok in ruins, half the orbital defense platforms destroyed. But still, Cadia held. He turned to Greyfax, who stood beside him, her armor scorched, her eyes hard. Block quote. They have the numbers, she said quietly, and the gods themselves. Creed smiled faintly. Then it's a fair fight. Outside, the horizon glowed red as dawn approached, but there was no sun, only the reflection of endless fire. The 13th Black Crusade had begun, and Cadia stood at its center, alone, defiant and surrounded by the night. Cadia stands, Creed whispered, until the last, and above them, the eye of terror pulsed brighter, like the heartbeat of a living god, heralding the horrors yet to come. Even the stars envy the courage of those who stood upon Cadia. The heavens above Cadia were aflame, the void alive with ship-to-ship duels, plasma detonations, and the shrieking tears of reality itself. And yet, beneath that apocalypse, order still held, because Creed still lived. In the command bastion of Khazar-Kraf, buried beneath kilometers of ferrocrete and adamantine, strong, Lord Castellan Creed stood before the hololith of the planet, The surface of Cadia was a sea of red, enemy contacts, orbital debris, daemon incursions, but his eyes remained calm, methodical. Around him, dozens of officers barked reports. Vox operators relayed coordinates. Servitors clanked and hissed. The air smelled of ozone, oil, and burning incense. The noise was chaos, yet Creed was the still point within it. He turned to his co-commander, Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax, the witch hunter, whose armor bore the scars of recent battle. Her tone was steel. "We've lost contact with the 43rd Armored near the Tyrock sector. Warp interference." "Then they'll fight until it clears," Creed replied. "They know their duty." He reached for his cigar, lit it with a trembling match. The glow illuminated his lined face. Not fear, but exhaustion forged into resolve. "This isn't just another siege," Greyfax said softly. "This is the end of the wall." Creed exhaled smoke, eyes never leaving the display. "Then we make sure the wall falls on them." Around them, the Imperium's might had gathered like a clenched fist. To the east, the Cadian 8th, Creed's own regiment, manned the primary trench lines. Veterans of 100 campaigns, disciplined to their last breath. To the north, Adeptus Mechanicus Scitari cohorts reinforced the bastions, their red robes fluttering in the chemical wind, chanting Binharic hymns as they calibrated plasma turrets. And in orbit, the Space Marines had arrived. From the sky descended the ships of the Space Wolves, Black Templars, and Ultramarines, each chapter answering the call to defend the gate. Drop pods burned through the atmosphere, slamming into the ground like meteors. When the hatches opened, angels of death stepped forth, their bolters singing hymns of vengeance. The lines of the Imperium were set. The final defense had begun. The war on Cadia was a symphony, and every sound was a note of death. The Adeptus Mechanicus had fortified the southern hemisphere with impossible precision. Massive macro-cannon emplacements, kilometers long, rotated with a deep, mechanical hum. Each shell they fired was the size of a tank, traveling at hypersonic velocity, shattering entire legions of chaos armor in a single shot. Red-robed tech priests moved through the trenches, their servo arms sparking, their voices murmuring prayers to the Omnissiah. Their faith was not of flesh or soul. It was of circuitry and data. "Steel endures," one whispered, pressing a sanctified rune upon a damaged lemon rus. "Flesh decays. Logic is eternal." Beside them, the soldiers of Cadia knelt in the mud, whispering prayers of their own, words of flesh, blood, and desperate hope. Two forms of worship, side by side. One for the machine god, one for the emperor. Both aimed at survival. Through the mist, the titans of the Legio Invigilata rose, towering silhouettes wreathed in fog and gunfire. Their banners hung tattered, each footstep shaking the world. Voices boomed from their voxcasters, deep and thunderous. For the Emperor, for Cadia. Every time one of those walking gods fired, the earth trembled, mountains shattered. Warp creatures were obliterated in pure light. The soldiers cheered. For a moment, hope flickered. But hope on Cadia was always short-lived. The Cadian front lines stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Trenches dug so deep they could swallow regiments whole. From above, they resembled veins, pulsing with movement, light, and life. Within those trenches, every soldier lived in a state between exhaustion and devotion. They cleaned weapons that had long since melted from heat. They patched armor with wire and prayer. They whispered oaths before dawn, knowing that night would take many of them. Sergeant Varon of the 8th Regiment wrote a final message into the dirt with his knife. To whoever finds this, Cadia stood when I fell. When the bombardments came, they came like gods roaring. Artillery fire turned the sky to molten gold. Lasguns flashed like fireflies across the darkness. And through it all, the chanting. Cadia stands. Cadia stands. Even as men screamed and died, the chant continued, spreading from trench to trench, a rhythm of defiance that drowned out the thunder. Greyfax stood above the trenches on a bastion ridge, her cloak whipping in the wind. Her eyes glowed faintly with psychic energy, scanning the horizon. She could feel it, the warp pressing close, the gods of chaos watching, hungry. "They're testing our resolve," she said over the vox. Creed's voice came back, calm and resolute. "Then they'll find it unbreakable." From the burning skies came salvation and fury. The Space Marines struck where the line began to falter. At Tyrok Basin, a full company of Black Templars charged through the breach, chainswords roaring, purity seals whipping through blood and ash. Their marshal shouted above the din, "No retreat, no remorse, no mercy." The ground split beneath their advance. Chaos Marines met them head-on, traitor against loyalist, brother against brother. The clash of ceramite on ceramite shook the battlefield. Bolter fire ripped through the air like thunder made solid. At such range, there was no room for words. Only rage, only faith. To the east, the Space Wolves fought beside the Cadian 122nd. Their howls echoed through the ruins, primal and wild. A single Wolf Lord cut down a Daemon Prince with his Frostblade, laughing as Warp Itcher splashed across his armor. "You chose the wrong world to die on," he roared. And above them, descending from orbit, the Ultramarines established orbital fire control, directing lance batteries to surgical precision. Their calm precision was the perfect counterpoint to the feral fury of the wolves and the zeal of the Templars. It was chaos, and yet, in that chaos, something divine took form. Mankind united in defiance. For one moment, the Imperium remembered what it meant to be whole. The battle raged for days without pause. No sunrise, no nightfall, only the endless glow of fire. The plains of Cadia had turned into a world of metal and corpses. In every direction, the same truth echoed. There was no retreat. Guardsmen held their ground until their ammunition ran dry, then drew bayonets and fought hand-to-hand. Mechanicus engineers repaired weapons as they fired, reciting binary hymns even as bullets tore through their augmetics. Space Marines fought shoulder to shoulder with mortals, their bolters thundering like divine wrath. And through all of it, Creed watched. He saw entire regiments erased. He saw titans fall. He saw heroes die nameless. And still, he whispered the same words. Hold. Every order he gave was measured, deliberate, carved from willpower alone. And as long as Creed commanded, Cadia would not fall. By the 10th day, the atmosphere itself burned. Ash rained from the heavens like black snow. But the Cadians still fought, because they knew every shot fired, every shell launched, every whispered prayer mattered. Each one was a defiance of inevitability. Greyfax led a counter-assault into the ruins of Casser Holm, her bolt pistol blazing golden light. Behind her, Sisters of Battle advanced in lockstep, their hymns rising above the roar of gunfire. "Even in darkness," she cried, "the Emperor sees us." When night finally fell, or what passed for night, under a burning sky, the world was silent. Only the wind remained, carrying the scent of smoke and sanctified blood. Creed stood once more atop the battlements, looking out across the ruin. Millions were dead. The earth itself had cracked, but the line, somehow, still held. He removed his cap, wiped the blood from his brow, and whispered into the wind, "Cadia stands." And though no one could hear him, the words carried. Through Vox networks, through prayer, through the very bones of the planet itself. A vow, a promise, a prophecy. Cadia stands. The day the sky broke began like any other on Cadia. Cold, silent, relentless. Frost still clung to the steel ramparts of Casser Craft, and the guard regiments were already in motion, marching, drilling, maintaining the ritual rhythm of survival. The banners of the Imperium fluttered in the icy wind, bearing the two-headed eagle that had weathered 10,000 years of storms. And then, for the briefest moment, the wind stopped. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. The sun dimmed, its light fractured, as if bent by glass submerged in water. Above the atmosphere, the void rippled, and from the depths of space came a distortion no sensor could interpret. Vox signals stuttered, picked feeds turned to static, and in the command bastion, Lord Castellan Creed raised his head, eyes narrowing. "Something's coming," he said. "Something vast." Moments later, the first warp storms bled into real space. They did not appear as fire or lightning, but as tears, rents in the firmament that oozed light and madness. From orbit, the blackness of space shimmered crimson. Astropathic choirs screamed in unison before their minds were torn apart. Ships stationed in high orbit began to vanish, some imploding inward, others stretched into impossible geometries before disintegrating. The storm spread. In a matter of hours, it consumed the system's outer moons. Communications failed entirely. Supply lines gone. Reinforcements lost to the void. And within that maelstrom of insanity, something immense moved. The shadow of a fortress, angular and ancient, propelled by unnatural force. The Blackstone fortress, once the Imperium's ultimate defense relic, now turned against its masters. From its core radiated a beam of energy so pure, so devastating, that even the void screamed. It carved through the fleet's defensive lines, turning kilometers of void armor to vapor. Entire cruisers vanished without leaving wreckage. And at the helm of that fortress, Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, the eternal betrayer, gazed upon Cadia with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had waited millennia for his prey to bleed. "Let the Emperor watch," he whispered. "Let him see his bastion burn." Then the Blackstone fortress fired again. From the surface, the sky itself had become an ocean of madness. Streaks of warp fire tore through the upper atmosphere, leaving trails of violet flame that never faded. The sun vanished behind a swirling storm of crimson clouds. Vox transmissions were reduced to howls of interference. The fortress's beam struck Cadia's orbital plate, the Cadian Gate defense array, once a marvel of human engineering. It detonated like a dying star. The explosion tore open the magnetosphere, and shockwaves rolled down upon the surface like the fists of angry gods. Cassar cities shook, mountains cracked, the night sky burned. At the command bastion, Creed's officers clung to hollow displays that flickered and died. "We've lost orbital control. Signal to Segmentum Command is gone. The storm, it's growing, my lord. It's swallowing everything." Creed's voice cut through the chaos. "Then we hold the ground. That's what Cadia does." Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax stood beside him, her armor gleaming faintly in the dim light of the failing generators. Her expression was unreadable, eyes sharp, lips pressed thin. "The warp is no longer leaking, Creed. It's consuming." "Then let it choke on us." They shared a look, not of hope, but of understanding. There would be no evacuation, no retreat. Cadia would stand or die. Beyond the walls, the first wave of demonic manifestations began. The snow turned to ash. The air itself screamed. From invisible fissures, creatures of nightmare poured into reality. Things of claw and hate, laughter and flame. They were formless at first, twisting into shapes their victims feared most. The guardsmen opened fire. Bolts of las energy lit the dark like dawn. For every demon burned, 10 more clawed their way through the veil. Overhead, the Blackstone fortress fired again, and the heavens wept fire. Cassar Craft fell first, then Cassar Holm. Then the spires of Cassar Myrak were swallowed whole by fire. Each city fortress had stood for centuries, its foundations layered with adamantium and faith. But the fortress beams of Abaddon were not made to breach walls. They erased them. Every impact crater was kilometers wide, lined with molten glass, where once there were homes, families, shrines. From orbit, Cadia looked like a dying ember, glowing red beneath a shroud of dust. Yet even as everything crumbled, the Imperial Guard did not break. They fought from rubble, from trenches carved out of collapsed hab blocks. Commissars recited liturgies between artillery barrages. Priests marched through gunfire, swinging censers that released smoke and hymns into the poisoned air. "Every shot is a prayer," they cried. "Every kill an offering." And amidst the ruin, the Titans strode. War machines the size of cathedrals, bearing the sigil of the Legio Astorum, advanced through storms of fire. Their plasma annihilators cut through daemon hordes like scythes through mist. But for every victory, the ground trembled under another impact from orbit. Greyfax led her retinue through the ruins of Cassar Partox, purging cultists that had risen among the madness. The heretics were chanting praises to the Despoiler, their eyes burned out by the warp's light. "Their faith is rot," she spat. "Let the Emperor judge them." Her bolt gun spoke for him. By nightfall, a third of Cadia burned. And still, the banners of the Imperium flew, torn, blackened, but flying. No longer could one tell where prayers ended and screams began. In the trenches, outside the shattered Cassar Holm, thousands of soldiers clung to their rifles as the ground quaked. The air smelled of ozone, blood, and burning promethium. Above, the aurora of the warp shimmered in violent color, violet, crimson, gold, dancing like mockery of divine light. A Cadian sergeant, his face streaked with soot, whispered as he reloaded, "Cadia stands." The words were half mantra, half madness, but they spread down the line like fire. When the next daemon wave came, the soldiers did not retreat. They fought until their barrels melted, until lasguns became clubs, until their hands were broken, and they fought with knives, with fists, with teeth. Behind them, artillery thundered, each shell a hymn of defiance. In the command bunker, Creed watched the map dissolve into red markers. One by one, the Cassars went silent. Still, he refused to move. "Every second we stand," he said, "is a second the Imperium lives." Greyfax said nothing, but she watched him with something close to respect, perhaps even sorrow. In orbit, the Blackstone fortress turned again. Its energy lances pierced the upper crust of Cadia. Fault lines opened. Oceans boiled. The planet groaned like a wounded beast. The fall had begun. There comes a point when even stone remembers pain. Cadia was not just dying, it was being unmade. The warp storms thickened, and the line between real space and madness dissolved entirely. In the skies, daemons battled the Imperial Navy. In the void, broken ships drifted through oceans of fire. Entire continents cracked apart. And yet, amidst apocalypse, there was beauty. The light of dying titans shone like falling stars. Choirs of the last loyalists sang into the storm. The final Vox transmissions carried fragments of humanity's oldest virtue, hope. "To the last man," one voice said. "To the last breath," another. In the final hours, Creed stood upon the bastion walls. Around him, the world was ending. But he stood straight, cloak torn, eyes fixed on the fire above. "Let them come," he murmured. "Cadia stands." As if in answer, the ground beneath trembled violently. The Blackstone fortress fired one final time. The beam struck deep into Cadia's core. The crust split, magma erupting in rivers of molten sorrow. And as the planet began to collapse inward, millions of souls, soldiers, civilians, priests, warriors, cried out their last prayer in unison. "The Emperor protects." Then, silence. The light faded. The fortress turned away. And the world that had guarded humanity for 10,000 years was no more. Long after Cadia's death, the warp storm still shimmered where the world once stood. Fragments of its continents drifted in the void, glowing faintly, like embers refusing to die. Among them, the spirits of the fallen lingered, whispering through the currents of time. Cadia stands, and somewhere, deep in the endless dark, the Imperium still heard them. The end of Cadia was not a single explosion. It was silence. After the last beam from the Blackstone fortress tore through the planet's heart, there was no light left, only dust and the echo of prayers lost to the void. Fragments of cities drifted in orbit like gravestones. The great fortress world was no longer a world, but a scar upon reality itself. And yet, some still lived. Among shattered debris, in fragments of atmosphere clinging to twisted rock, survivors clung to life. Imperial Guard, Mechanicus Adepts, even civilians who had no words left to scream. They floated through the ruins in lifeboats, shuttles, and wrecks that barely functioned, each believing they were the last of their kind. Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax stood upon the observation deck of a crippled cruiser, staring into the warp rift where Cadia had been. Her armor was cracked, her voice raw from command, yet her eyes, cold and unflinching, remained sharp. Through the flickering viewports, she saw souls. Millions upon millions of them. They drifted into the rift, like sparks drawn into a storm, their psychic essence torn free from dying bodies, swallowed whole by the warp's hunger. Some screamed, some sang hymns, some simply vanished, like whispers fading in fog. Greyfax closed her eyes. Her faith was iron, her mind trained to resist corruption. Yet even she felt the edges of madness pressing close. "Emperor, how much longer must they suffer?" she thought. "How many more we be lost before you answer?" No answer came. Only the sound of the hull groaning as another wave of warp radiation struck. Outside, fragments of Cadia's core glowed like dying embers, lighting the void with a faint crimson hue. It was beautiful and utterly horrifying. On a nearby vessel, the Macaria's Pride, an old command ship now half broken, Lord Castellan Creed refused to rest. His hands trembled slightly as he leaned over the hololithic map, which now showed nothing but void static and broken signal markers. The surface was gone, the defense grid gone, the fleet scattered. Yet Creed still gave orders. Block quote. "Form the 8th Regiment around Debris Cluster 7. Re-establish Vox channels with any surviving CAS troopers. We hold this position." An officer hesitated. Block quote. "My lord, there is no position left to hold." Block quote. Creed looked up slowly. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it could crush steel. "Then we'll hold the void itself." No one argued. For Creed, defeat was not a word, only delay. Even as his ship bled air and fire, he continued to coordinate survivors, guiding them through the wreckage as if the world had not ended beneath his feet. In one moment of quiet, he looked through the viewport and saw the ruin of Cadia reflected in his eyes. "If Cadia falls, he murmured, almost to himself, "then the Imperium will tremble." He did not say it as despair. He said it as prophecy. And somewhere beyond the chaos, the universe listened. Days, or perhaps hours, time had lost meaning, passed within the drifting wrecks. The survivors huddled in the dark, feeding on recycled air and emergency rations. They told stories to keep the madness away. Stories of home, of battle, of the Emperor. Some even prayed aloud to the faint hum of dying generators. Greyfax walked among them, her cloak torn and blood-stained. Where once she had been the unyielding Inquisitor, she now carried the aura of a mourner. "Do not lose yourselves," she told them softly. "Cadia may be gone, but its spirit is not." One young guardsman, his face pale, eyes hollow, looked up. "Then where is it, my lady? Where is Cadia now?" She paused. Through the viewport behind them, the warp rift pulsed, casting a dull red glow across their faces. "There," she said at last, "in every soul that refuses to bow." Outside, they could see shapes moving within the rift, demons feeding upon the dead, shadows with wings of fire, and laughter that cracked like glass. Each moment, the survivors could feel the pull, the whisper to surrender, to give in, to drift into the light. Some did. Some took off their helmets, opened the airlocks, and let the warp take them. And Greyfax watched every one of them go. Faith is not endurance, she thought. Faith is choosing to endure, even when the Emperor is silent. The warp storm grew. It expanded beyond the Cadian Gate, swallowing entire sectors in its wake. Astropathic silence fell across dozens of worlds. For the first time in millennia, the Imperium could no longer see through the gate. The Eye of Terror had won. Aboard the broken fleet, hallucinations began. Men saw faces in the walls, heard voices in static. Some prayed to gods they had never named. Some tore out their eyes, claiming they saw the truth too clearly. Creed's voice echoed through failing vox lines. "Hold your minds, soldiers. We've lost the world, not the war." But the war he spoke of had changed. It was no longer fought with guns or blades. It was fought in the soul, in the fragile boundary between faith and madness. Greyfax spent every waking hour purging corruption before it could spread. Her bolt gun spoke the Emperor's judgment upon those who whispered the name Abaddon with reverence. She did not hesitate, but each pull of the trigger carved a deeper wound in her heart. Once, as she executed a corrupted guardsman who had begun to mutate, she saw a tear slide down his cheek. Block quote. "I only wanted to go home," he whispered, as his body turned to ash. Greyfax turned away. There were no homes left. Eventually, the survivors found temporary shelter, a field of debris large enough to hold oxygen pockets and life support bubbles. They named it the Graveyard. Here, Creed assembled what remained of the Cadian command. 30 officers, a handful of psychers, a Mechanicus Magos half insane from radiation burns. Together, they devised a plan to broadcast a final signal through the warp storms, a message to the Imperium that Cadia still fought. "If anyone hears this," Creed began, his voice steady over the broken vox, "Cadia stands. The gate has fallen, but the sons and daughters of Cadia remain. We will hold until the last." The message repeated, endlessly, echoing into the void. No one knew if it would ever be heard. Greyfax watched him from the shadows, silently. There was no victory here, and both of them knew it. But still he stood, cloak torn, hands bloodied, eyes fixed on the abyss, as if daring it to look back. She approached quietly. "You cannot fight the warp forever, Castellan." "No," he said, "but I can make it bleed." As the final hours of the survivors ticked away, the warp storm reached its zenith. The debris field shook as gravitational tides pulled them toward the rift. Greyfax looked upon the faces of the few still alive, each one marked by exhaustion, yet none willing to kneel. "We are already dead," one of them said. "Why keep fighting?" She smiled, saintly. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile. "Because the Emperor is watching." Outside, the void burned with impossible color. The spirits of the fallen, millions of them, still drifted, their faint glow dancing through the rift like starlight. It was as if Cadia itself refused to vanish completely. Creed stood at the command console one last time. His eyes lingered on the hollow map that no longer displayed land or sea, only the word Cadia flashing red. He whispered softly, "We did our duty." The storm roared, the light swallowed them, and then, as the last signal left the dying fleet, a single transmission pulsed through the darkness. "Cadia stands." Long after the last survivor was gone, the warp rift still glowed where Cadia had been. Ships passing through the sector claimed to hear faint whispers in the void. Some said it was the wind, others the Emperor's angels. But those who listened closely swore they heard something else. A single, human voice, defiant even in death. "If Cadia falls, then the Imperium will tremble." And the Imperium did. In the cold silence after the storm, the stars themselves seemed to fade. What remained of the Cadian Gate drifted in ruin, a graveyard of ships, dust, and broken prayers. But from within the warp, something vast moved. The Blackstone fortress, ancient beyond memory, cut through the tides of unreality like a blade through fog. Once a marvel of the Imperium's golden age, now it was the weapon of the War Master of Chaos, a fortress turned executioner. At its command bridge stood Abaddon the Despoiler, his armor reflecting the light of the dying system. Around him, the air shimmered with the whispers of daemons and the laughter of gods. He gazed upon Cadia, broken, yet still glowing faintly, its surface split but defiant. "They still live," Abaddon murmured. "Even shattered, they cling to hope." He turned toward the viewport, the void fire dancing in his eyes. "Then let me teach them despair." His gauntlet closed around the command crystal. The engines of the Blackstone fortress began to roar, a sound that shook both real space and the warp. And with deliberate, dreadful grace, the fortress began to move. Not to fire, not to bombard, but to strong descend toward Cadia. Hard reset. In the ruins below, Lord Castellan Creed stood on the shattered battlements of the last functioning bastion. Smoke filled the air. The ground trembled beneath his boots, each vibration stronger than the last. "Report," he barked. A Vox operator struggled to answer, her voice broken by static. Block quote. "Sir, it's moving. The fortress, it's descending, straight toward us." Creed looked up. Through the ash-filled sky, he saw it. A black mass, larger than mountains, eclipsing the red sun. The Blackstone fortress. It was falling, not like a meteor, but like a god descending to crush the world beneath its hand. For a moment, no one spoke. The soldiers around him simply stared, their minds unable to grasp the scale of what they saw. The clouds tore apart in concentric rings of flame as the fortress pierced the atmosphere. "Emperor," one whispered. "He's ending the world himself." Creed's jaw tightened. His voice came out steady, cold. "No, he's ending a rock, not Cadia." He turned to his staff. "Signal all survivors. Begin the evacuation. Any ship, any shuttle, any pod still flying, get them off the surface now." "Sir, there's nowhere to go." "Then we'll die trying." Cadia does not kneel. The ground convulsed again, louder this time, like thunder from the core of the planet itself. Above, the fortress drew closer, a black sun against a blood-red sky. When the Blackstone fortress struck, the world screamed. The impact was not fire, not sound, but force. A shockwave that traveled faster than light, splitting the crust of Cadia like glass beneath a hammer. Entire continents folded in upon themselves. Mountain ranges crumbled into vapor. Oceans boiled away in seconds. The core of Cadia shuddered and burst, releasing energy that lit the void like a new star. From orbit, it looked beautiful, the kind of beauty only the end of a world could bring. Rivers of molten light carved through the planet's skin. Cities turned to silhouettes before dissolving into white flame. The sky, once black, burned red, the color of blood, memory, and the dying of hope. In the command bunker, Creed was thrown against the wall. Dust and fire rained down. Vox lines screamed before cutting to silence. For a moment, He lay still, tasting blood and iron, before pulling himself to his feet. Status: Sir, everything's gone. Casholm, Casmyrak, Cascraft, all gone. He closed his eyes. The world trembled beneath him. And yet, somehow, he found his voice. A whisper turned to command. Then get them out. Whatever's left. From the blocksquote, and which produced a day's sound. Above the world. Blackstone fortress burned. Fragments of its lower hull sheared away from the violence of the collision, drifting into orbit like dark moons. Its impact had torn the veil between realities open. The warp poured through the wound, painting the void in crimson storms. Ruins rose from cracks, miles deep. The ground twisted into floating shards as gravity itself faltered. Her armor was scorched, her cloak torn. She gazed upward, at the burning fortress, the rivers of fire, the dying sky. And for the first time, she felt something close to awe. Blackquote. So this, she whispered, is how gods make war. A guardsman beside her fell to his knees. Blackquote. It's over, my lady. We've lost. Greyfax turned to him, her expression unreadable. No, soldier. Losing means surrender. We have not surrendered. He stared up at her, tears cutting through the ash on his face. Then what are we doing? We are remembering. Above them, the light turned deeper, red and gold, the color of dying suns. Cadia was collapsing. Yet in that collapse, there was something eternal. Every spark that rose from its surface was a soul carried into the warp, not as a cry of defeat, but as a final salute. Creed stood once more in the ruins of his command post. Half his men were dead. The rest could barely stand. The Vox crackled with the dying echoes of the evacuation. Sir, the planet's breaking apart. Then let it. Get to the shuttles. A young lieutenant hesitated. And you, my lord. Creed looked at the burning horizon, where the Blackstone fortress had buried itself in the planet's core. I'll be the last to leave. He activated the final Vox beacon, a transmission that would repeat until power ran out. His voice, calm and resolute, carried across the collapsing world. To all surviving Cadian forces, this is Lord Castellan Creed. Cadia has fallen. The world is lost. But hear me now. He paused, breathing in the heat and ash. The words that came next were not orders, but truth. The spirit of Cadia does not fall. It cannot be broken, because it lives in all of you. Wherever humanity stands, Cadia stands with it. He turned to Greyfax, who had arrived through the smoke, her eyes dark but alive. Go, he said. Take them. Keep the light burning. And you? She asked quietly. Someone must watch it end. The end came quietly. As the last ships tore free from Cadia's atmosphere, the world beneath them disintegrated into light. The crust shattered into billions of fragments, glowing like embers in the night. And from within the core, a final pulse of energy rippled outward. Not destruction, but release. Every fallen Cadian, every lost soul, every whisper of defiance, all became part of that last, blinding light. From orbit, it was as though Cadia had turned into a star, a crimson sun that shone for a single, eternal moment before fading into the dark. In the escaping ships, survivors watched in silence. Some wept, some prayed. Greyfax bowed her head. The Emperor watches, she said softly, and Cadia stands. Creed remained on the surface until the very end. His figure was last seen standing upon the battlements, cloak burning, gaze fixed upon the falling sky. When the final shockwave came, he did not move. And when the light faded, he was gone. But his voice, his words, lingered in the static of the surviving Vox transmissions. A single message, repeating endlessly across the void. Cadia has fallen, but Cadia stands. In the centuries that followed, travelers who passed through the ruins of the Cadian Gate spoke of a faint red light that shimmered in the warp. It was not a star, nor a storm, but something older, purer, a remembrance. And when the faithful heard it, they said it sounded like a whisper carried on the cosmic wind. Cadia stands, even in death, even in the dark. The fortress world that held the line for 10,000 years still stood, not in stone, not in flesh, but in spirit. And the galaxy would never forget. The void was silent. In that silence drifted the ships, cracked hulls, wounded engines, smoke leaking from shattered vents, carrying what little remained of Cadia's sons and daughters. They moved through the darkness like ghosts. Every viewport showed the same sight, a field of burning debris, glowing faintly where a world had once been. The fragments of Cadia shimmered in the light of the dying sun, spinning slowly into the warp's edge. P.S.P. Inside the flagship, Vigilant Resolve, Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax stood alone in the observation deck. The glass before her was fractured, streaked with ash and the faint reflection of her face, pale, tired, yet unbroken. P.S. Behind her, the surviving guardsmen lay in makeshift infirmaries. The corridors echoed with whispers, the soft prayers of men and women who had seen the end of their world. Greyfax's gaze lingered on the red nebula where Cadia once hung. "So this is what remains," she whispered, "a light in the dark and a memory." Her hand closed around the rosarius on her chest. The symbol was scorched, half melted, but it still glowed faintly, a stubborn ember refusing to die. She turned to the Vox officer beside her. "Transmit to every ship, every surviving frequency." "Message, my lady?" "Yes." Her voice steadied, soft but sharp as steel. "To all survivors of Cadia, this is Inquisitor Katarinya Greyfax. You have fought the impossible. You have faced gods and did not yield. The world may have fallen, but Cadia still stands in you. Remember that. Carry it. Let it burn within your hearts until the stars themselves go dark." The message echoed across the fleet. Men and women paused where they stood, listening. Some cried, some saluted the empty air. Even in silence, the words carried strength, the kind that does not fade, even in death. Far beyond, within the warp, a throne of iron and bone stood upon the tides of madness. And upon that throne sat Abaddon the Despoiler. The air around him burned with the laughter of the chaos gods. Their whispers were wind and flame, their joy a storm that tore at the very fabric of reality. The War Master gazed into the void where Cadia had been, the site of his vengeance, now a scar of crimson light. He rose, the talon of Horus crackling with warp fire, and stretched out his hand toward the empty stars. "It is done," he said. His voice echoed through the Imperium. "The gate has fallen. The Imperium shall burn." The daemons screamed in joy, a choir of madness. The warp rippled, and the shadows of dead worlds flickered in the reflection of his armor. But somewhere, faint and defiant, a whisper echoed back, small, stubborn, human. Cadia stands. Abaddon's grin faltered for a breath. Then he laughed, a deep, thunderous sound that made the warp tremble. Let them stand, he roared. Let them stand in the ashes. For every fortress that stands, I will break 10 more. For every world that burns, I will feed the gods their fill. He turned his back to the fading light and walked deeper into the storm, toward Terra, toward vengeance unending. The galaxy itself shuddered. It was a war without end. Back among the stars, the survivors gathered in the war room of the vigilant resolve. The air was thick with grief and silence. Every officer who had escaped, bloodied, exhausted, stood around the table where the sigil of Cadia was carved. Greyfax looked at them, men who had lost everything, yet still stood straight, their eyes cold with purpose. You all know what we've lost, she said, but you also know what we carry. She placed her hand upon the sigil, cracked, blackened from the fall. Creed gave his life for this, not to save a planet, but to save the idea of one, the belief that duty is eternal, that humanity does not yield. A murmur spread through the room. Someone whispered, "What now?" Greyfax's answer was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Now we fight. She turned toward the window, the warp storms flaring red and gold outside. Cadia has fallen, but the Imperium still stands, and as long as one soldier remembers who we are, the Despoiler has not won. There was no cheer, no rallying cry, only a slow, collective nod. Resolve, duty, faith, the same things that had built Cadia, the same things that would rebuild what was lost. Weeks passed, then months. The fleet drifted beyond the ruins of the Cadian Gate, into the uncertain light of the Segmentum Obscurus. And yet, when the navigators peered into the warp, they saw it, a faint, steady glow. Red and golden, pulsing like a heartbeat. It's not possible, one murmured. The planet's gone. Then what are we seeing? Greyfax stood beside him, eyes fixed on the distant light. Not the planet, she said, the memory. For in that glow, that ember that refused to die, was the echo of every soul that had fought, bled, and burned for Cadia. It was more than a remnant. It was a promise. From that day onward, Imperial records marked it simply as the Red Star of Cadia. Pilgrims whispered prayers to it. Ships passing through its light reported hearing faint echoes in the Vox, the distant sound of drums, boots, and a voice that said over and over again, Cadia stands. In the halls of the vigilant resolve, the survivors built a shrine, a small chamber lined with fragments of armor and banners scorched by fire. At its center stood Creed's empty command cloak, folded and laid upon a slab of stone. Every day, a soldier would enter and light a single candle. No words, no prayers, just silence. The candles multiplied, until the chamber glowed with soft golden light, a constellation of memory. Greyfax visited often. Each time she would stand before the cloak and whisper, barely audible, "You were right. Cadia stands." And though she knew no answer would come, sometimes, when the ship's engines fell quiet and the warp winds were calm, she thought she heard a faint echo through the Vox, distant and crackling. For Cadia. And so the tale ends, not with victory, nor peace, but with endurance. The fall of Cadia marked the end of an age, but also the beginning of something eternal, because from that ruin rose a truth that no god, no daemon, no warlord could ever silence, that humanity does not yield. Across the stars, soldiers still whisper it before battle. Chaplains carve it upon their armor. Children born on far worlds learn to speak it before they learn to pray. Cadia has fallen, yet even in death, Cadia stands. The stars drift in endless night, the warp howls, but somewhere, in the quiet between the screams, a world that no longer exists still shines. And if you listen closely, if you close your eyes and let the silence settle, you might still hear it, a whisper in the void, a heartbeat in the dark. Cadia stands.